Hello, my name is Jeremy Houck, and I'd like to thank you for making the choice to join us here at the Greenbrier Church Online. Tristan and I have some friends whose son played basketball with our youngest son, Rylan, at Lipscomb University. We'd see them at games on the weekend. We'd stand around the parking lot and talk longer than we probably should and go grab a bite to eat afterward. They're really great people, the kind of friends that you don't have to work hard to enjoy. The conversation just kind of flows, time flies, and you leave thinking, man, that was great. I can't wait to do that again. Well, their son Grant is getting married this summer, and here's what makes it even better. He's getting married the day after our son Trafton marries the love of his life. Same town, same weekend, back-to-back days, one on Saturday, one on Sunday. Now, late last year, I walked out to our mailbox and I pulled out this beautiful invitation, had a handwritten envelope, a gold foil seal, a love stamp pressed in the corner. And I took it inside and showed it to Trista, and we both talked about how happy we were for Grant and his bride, Gracie. And we agreed we need to RSVP, so I took the invitation and I put it on the refrigerator, which in our house is the universal signal for important things. We don't want to forget about it. And then life happened. Our parents, the boys, work, a million little urgent, insignificant things. Months went by, and a few weeks ago, I got a text from our friends just checking in to see if we were still going to come to the wedding. And I felt awful about that. I mean, genuinely awful. It's not that we don't want to go. It's not that we don't like them. I mean, we're really looking forward to going and to seeing them and to be a part of this special day. Well, honestly, it's just that I hadn't thought about the invitation since I put it on the refrigerator under a magnet that we got in New York City. It just sat there every single day in plain sight, and I never stopped to act on it. Here's what I've learned about myself, and I kind of have a feeling I'm not alone in this. I don't usually reject things on purpose, I just neglect them. And the uncomfortable truth is that neglect is just a slow, polite way of saying no. There's no dramatic moment, there's just drift, distraction, days turning into weeks, into months, and a beautiful invitation slowly disappearing behind fast food coupons. I think that's exactly why Jesus told our parable today, not just once, but in two different versions, because, well, he understands the human heart. He knows that our problem isn't usually open rebellion against God, it's passive distraction. We put it on the refrigerator. It's the good intentions that quietly fade into the background noise of a full, busy, overwhelmed life. In Matthew's version, Jesus is in the temple days before his crucifixion. He's surrounded by Pharisees and chief priests, men who believe that they are God's favorite. Luke's version is slightly different. Jesus is invited to the home of a prominent Pharisee for a meal, and as he arrives, he watches the other guests come in, and he notices how they're maneuvering for the best seat at the table. You know how it goes. You pretend to look at the art on the wall and you meander towards that most important seat. Jesus watches all of this, and instead of letting it go, he turns to his host and says, "Let me tell you a story about a party." In both versions, Jesus is saying the exact same thing. The people who think they're in are actually out, and the people who they look down on, well, they're finding a seat at the head of the table. This isn't a gentle, inspirational story. It's a spiritual bombshell dropped in the middle of the room. This parable takes place at a wedding feast, and a first century Jewish wedding is nothing like the weddings we have today. I mean, when Tristan and I got married, the whole thing lasted maybe 2-3 hours. We had a ceremony. I sang to her. She promised to love me in sickness and in health. We said, "I do." We took some pictures. There was some light refreshments, some cake, some punch, and we mingled around with our friends and our family for a little while. Then we got in a car that took us away, and everybody else went home. A Jewish wedding celebration lasted for days. The whole village would shut down, work would stop, There were tables overflowing with food. The groom would parade through the town with his friends. The bride was escorted to the wedding like royalty. It was a huge social event. To be invited to a wedding like this wasn't just nice, it was an honor. This meant that your family mattered. And invitations worked differently as well. We send invitations that come months in advance. There's a date, a time, an RSVP, a deadline, a link to a gift registry, usually a card where you can choose, do you want to eat chicken or fish? You know everything up front. But a Jewish wedding had two separate invitations. The first came weeks ahead of time. You were invited and you said yes. You're making a binding commitment, even though you're not really sure what day the feast began. Wedding feasts took significant time to prepare. You're talking about slaughtering and roasting animals, preparing multiple courses, baking enough bread to feed an entire village, pressing wine, decorating the hall. Depending on the size of the celebration, the preparation could take days or weeks or even a full month. So when everything is ready, the host sends servants out with the second call. Come, everything is prepared, the feast is ready. The second message wasn't a surprise. You knew it was coming, you'd already committed. When the servant knocked on your door, you were expected to drop everything you were doing and go to the wedding. So when Jesus says that the guests refused to come, every person listening would have been shocked and appalled. This isn't a scheduling conflict. This wasn't oh, I forgot. This is an intentional insult, a slap in the face of the king. I mean, you'd already said, yes, he's prepared this feast for you to attend, and now you're saying, change my mind, no thanks. In that culture, that's an act of war. It's a declaration that your son doesn't matter, your celebration doesn't matter, your authority doesn't matter. I have better things to do. But these guests feel justified because they have their excuses ready. One says, I've just bought a field and I need to inspect it. Please excuse me. Another says, I've just bought 5 pair of oxen and I want to try them out. And then another one says, I just got married, so I can't come. Now, on the surface, those sound kind of reasonable. But the longer that I think about them, actually, the worse they get. Nobody buys a field without inspecting it first. Nobody purchases 10 oxen without trying them out. And the newlyweds? I mean, the king has just invited you to a huge feast, a celebration, and you're using the fact that you got married a few days or months ago as an excuse not to attend the party. None of these excuses are evil, and I think that's what makes them so dangerous. It's not, I'd rather go worship an idol. It's, I've got a field, I've got a business, a family. Ordinary, normal, even good things. And they become the reason that these people miss everything. And here's where it gets personal, because I think we use the same exact excuses every week. God, I'd love to follow you. I'm just so busy. I've got employees, I've got payroll, I've got investors. And once things stabilize, once I get to a place where I can breathe again, then I'll have some more time for the spiritual stuff. It's just another way of saying I bought a field. I want to make church a priority. I really do, but Sunday's honestly that one morning in my week where I don't have to be anywhere. And my week is exhausting. I really need that sleep. I just watched the sermon online, right? God understands rest. That's just another way of saying I'm busy checking on my oxen. I want to be generous. Giving is something I feel called to do, but have you seen my student loans? And we're trying to pay off the house, and our kids are getting ready for college. And once I'm more financially stable, once I've built up some margin, then I think I really want to start tithing. And that's just another way of saying my resources belong to me first. I'd love to serve in the church, to use my gifts to get involved, but man, between work deadlines and making sure my kids get to practice and weekend trips and trying to maintain some kind of social life, I just don't really have the time right now. Besides, I can worship God anywhere. I don't need to go and gather in a building with other Christians to connect to Him. That's just another way of saying, I just got married. Now, these excuses don't sound like rejections. They sound like responsibility, like something an adult with real obligations would say. And that's exactly what makes them so effective, because there's always going to be a field to inspect or oxen to test. Life never reaches that moment where you sit back and say, finally, I've got the time that I want to make God a priority. It doesn't work that way. Urgencies multiply, distractions get louder, and they don't feel like rebellion. They just feel like life. You don't sit down one day and say, I've decided that I'm going to drift away from God. You just kind of get busy and God gets pushed to the background. Now, in the parable in Matthew's gospel, it takes a darker turn, because some of the invited guests don't just make excuses. They seize the king's servants, they mistreat them, they kill them. I mentioned last week that the crowd would have immediately thought about the prophets who had been mocked and beaten and beheaded. Jesus is looking right at the Pharisees and he says, you think you want the kingdom, you say you want to come to the feast, and you should be the most excited about the banquet, but you've murdered everyone I've sent to invite you. And then 6 days later, they're going to arrest Jesus in a garden. Now, I don't believe that violence against prophets, I don't think that's our temptation. But I do think we have our own subtle versions of killing the messengers, and we don't use swords, we use cynicism. Every time we hear the invitation, we say, not right now. When we do that, we're holding the door open for something dangerous, because the most hazardous place to be is not outside the banquet. It's standing at the door saying that I'll come in later. And later never comes. Then something happens in the story that takes my breath away. The king is furious. He sends an army and burns the city. The consequences for rejecting the invitation are severe. Jesus isn't soft-pedaling that. There are real stakes involved here. But something unexpected happened. The king, well, he doesn't cancel the party. He turns to his servants and says something completely unexpected. Go into the streets and invite anyone you find. Bring them all so my house will be full. Talk about a shocking twist. In first century Jewish society, meals are profoundly social and symbolic. Who you ate with is who you considered worthy of your table. And the Pharisees have these elaborate rules about who's clean enough to share a meal with. You don't eat with tax collectors, you don't eat with prostitutes, you don't eat with lepers, and you definitely don't share a table with a Gentile. And the king says, you go get the people who have learned through years of rejection and exclusion that there's no place for them at a table. You go get them. You go get the people who had given up any hope that they would ever be wanted. Those are the ones that I want you to bring into the feast. So the servants went out to the streets and gathered all the people they could find, the bad as well as the good, and the wedding hall was filled with guests. Matthew intentionally says the bad as well as the good. You see, this isn't a story about good people finally getting rewarded. This is a story about the wrong people, the people that nobody wanted, being seated at a feast they could have never earned. That's the gospel. Not the watered down motivational poster version of it, the real gospel, the kind that offends people who think that they've done something to earn their place at the feast. Luke adds a detail that I love. After the servants come back and they report there's still room, the king says, go out into the country lanes and behind the hedges and urge anyone you find to come so that my house will be full. The invitation keeps going further, reaching further, pursuing people that aren't looking for it, who are not expecting it, people who had no hope of an invitation. I don't know, maybe that's your story. Maybe you've spent years operating under this quiet assumption that God is for other people, that church is for folks that have it more together than you do, that faith is for people that haven't done the things that you've done. They don't share your past. But Jesus is telling this story because he wants all of us to know that the servants are coming to find you. The king is saying, there's still room. Now we come to the part of the story that everyone finds uncomfortable. And honestly, it should be uncomfortable. That's kind of the point. The king comes in and he sees his guests. He's walking through the hall, taking it all in. People who never expected to be there, food that was almost going to waste. And he stops and he sees a man who's not properly dressed. The king walks up to him and asks, "Friend, how is it that you're here without wedding clothes?" But the man had no reply. And the king has him removed, bound, and thrown into the outer darkness. Now, when we read that, we think, boy, that's kind of harsh. Isn't this supposed to be a story about radical grace? Isn't this the part where everyone gets in? Why is somebody being thrown out? Well, here's what we don't know. When a king held a wedding feast, he also provided the wedding garments. They're available at the entrance. The king provides these beautiful robes freely to everyone as an act of his generosity. So the man doesn't fail a dress code because he's too poor, and he doesn't show up in old clothes because nobody told him. The robes are right there at the door. He walks right past them. He just refuses the king's gift. He tried to show up on his own terms in his own clothes, thinking, I want the celebration, but I'm going to do this my way. I don't need what the king is offering. And that's the point where grace meets something harder. God's invitation is scandalously open. Come as you are. But come as you are doesn't mean stay as you are. It means come and accept what the king provides. The prophet Isaiah says, all our righteousness acts are like filthy rags. Not our worst moments, not the things that we're most ashamed of, our righteous acts. The things that we're the most proud of, the moments that we point to when we want to convince ourselves that we've earned our seat at the table. The truth is that even our best days are stained with sin. We can't dress for the feast on our own. That's the whole reason Jesus came. Paul writes, for God made Christ, who never sinned, to be the offering for our sin so that we could be made right with God through Christ. That's the robe we're offered. Jesus takes our filthy rags, every failure, every sin, and gives us his perfect righteousness in return. It's not a transaction that we've earned. It's a gift that we receive, but we have to put it on. And the terrifying truth is that some of us are going to be removed from the celebration because we have tried to come to the feast on our own. Some of us refuse to put on the wedding garment because of our pride. You walked up to the door, you saw the robe, and something inside of you said, I don't need that. My clothes are fine. I'm a good person. God should be happy to have me. After all, I'm a whole lot better than my coworkers and my neighbors. But the robe's not being better than the person next to you. The robe is about being clothed in the righteousness of God himself. Pride is subtle. It doesn't always sound like arrogance. Sometimes it sounds like, I think I'll be okay. Some of us refuse to put on the wedding garment because of our shame. You walk up to the door, you see the robe, and something inside you says, I can't wear that. I don't deserve that. You don't know what I've done. You don't know where I've been. If people saw the real version of my life, there's no way they would invite me to put on a clean robe. This person has convinced themselves that grace is for other people, people who haven't messed up as badly. If that's you today, you need to hear Jesus say, the robe is not for clean people. If you were already clean, you wouldn't need the robe. The whole scandalous, offensive point of grace is that it's for dirty people. That's why it's a gift. You can't earn it. Because if you could earn it, well, it would stop being grace. Some of us refuse to put on the wedding garment because of our distractions. We walk up to the door, we see the robe, and we think, I really need to get one of those. But we just kind of walk past it. Maybe somebody calls your name, there's food on the table, the music starts, people are laughing, and it all feels so warm, and you tell yourself, I'll go back and grab the robe in a minute. I'm going to deal with that later. And then a minute turns into 10, a minute to the whole night. And then suddenly the king is walking through the room, and that robe you never put on, not because you're proud, not because you're ashamed, the robe you refuse to put on because you're distracted, you don't have it. This is the person who wants just enough of Jesus to feel safe, but not enough to require any real change. And Jesus says that doesn't work. You can attend every Sunday, sing every song, come to the table every week, and still miss the whole thing because you kept meaning to get serious about God. There were always moments when something pulled at your heart, a sermon, a song, a hard conversation, and you thought, I really need to deal with this. Someday never comes. Someday is an intention. It feels like a plan, but it's the thief of the feast. Here's what Jesus is showing us. There are two types of people that are going to miss the feast, and both of them are tragedies. The first is the group who never responded to the invitation. They were too busy. They look at what God's offering and they think, I've got other things going on. I'll get to that later. Sometimes these people are outside the church entirely. They might not be against God. They're just not particularly interested in having a relationship with Him right now because life is full. Things are fine. They're managing okay. And some of these people are sitting in a church. They've been sitting in a church for 20 years, but they've never actually said yes to the invitation. They've come to a building without ever walking into the door. And then there's that second group, the people who show up to the feast, but they refuse to put on the robe. They want Jesus as a Savior who rescues them from the consequences of their choices, but they don't want Jesus as the Lord of their life. They want all the grace. They're just not willing to allow that grace to change their heart. They want to come on their own terms. And Jesus says that both groups are going to miss the feast. I need you to know that the feast is right now. It's not someday. It's not once you get yourself together. The table is already set. The king is sending servants. The robe is hanging at the door. And you don't have to clean yourself up first. You don't have to fix the things that you've broken. You don't have to wait until you feel worthy. Because honestly, that day's never going to come. The only thing you can't do is keep waiting. Because waiting is just another way to say no. We're about to go to the tables and take communion together. But today I want to offer you a different way of thinking about what we're going to do. Communion is not a ritual or a religious obligation that we check off. It's a taste of the wedding feast. It's a preview. It's the king setting a small table right now and saying, come and see. Come and experience what I'm inviting you to. Let this bread and this cup be a down payment on everything that I am preparing for you right now. Every time we take communion, we're saying, I accept the invitation. I want to put on the robe. But it's also the place where we can come together with other broken, sinful travelers who also don't deserve to come to the feast. The same people who have been invited by the same loving and gracious king who invited you. The table is a safe place to respond to what God's calling you to. And maybe today is the day that you finally say yes to the invitation that you've been postponing. Maybe today is the day you stop sounding convincing and finally admit for the first time out loud that you have been walking past the robe and you're tired of talking about it. You're ready to put it on. The table is our reminder that there's still room. The feast is ready. And the king is not checking a list of qualifications at the door. He's just waiting for us to come home. And so we go to the table to give us an anticipation of the greater feast that awaits for us once we get to heaven with God for eternity. But in order to do that, we have to accept the invitation. And we have to put on the robe. And we have to allow the grace of Jesus Christ, the grace that we celebrate through the bread and the cup, to not only come in and save our souls, but change us so that we will be more like the one who calls us to the feast. I hope that you have a wonderful time around the table this morning, that you're able to think about your relationship with God and what you need to do to have a closer relationship with Him. Never forget how deeply He loves you, and never forget how deeply you're loved. I hope you have a wonderful week, and I look forward to seeing you very soon.